Welcome back. You're listening to Ask the CIO, sponsored by Vion and Dell on Federal News Network. I'm Jason Miller. My guest today is Dr. Amy Abernathy, the Principal Deputy Commissioner and Acting CIO at the Food and Drug Administration. Now, Amy, before break, we were talking about data a little bit, and you mentioned your new CDO. You mentioned this idea of a data strategy. So let's start there. Data is the lifeblood. Every time I talk to an agency, it's data is the new oil. We can't live without our data. You can fill in your old adage there. How are you at the FDA focused on data? And of course, where does the cloud fit into that discussion?
Well, I wanted to say data is the lifeblood. It's our oil. We can't live without our data.
Very good.
But seriously, when we think about what is the core that keeps FDA humming, what we do is review data in order to make decisions about the products that we regulate. So data is the fundamental element to how we make our regulatory decisions every day. And practically speaking, therefore, the way that we think about data, the way that we use data at our agency also informs how we're going to have the capabilities to use data efficiently as we make our regulatory decisions. When we set up our Technology Modernization Action Plan in September, I estimated that approximately 18 to 24 months after the TMAP came out, we would be announcing our enterprise data strategy, which still needs a name, but we'll call it the DMAP for the moment. And that was September. By March, it was clear that the enterprise data strategy was critical and in fact was going to be right on the heels of the Technology Modernization Action Plan. That was partly because the time period to really set up our move to the cloud and help to advance our technical organization was shorter than I thought it was going to be, and also because the criticality of data, artificial intelligence, and how we're going to use data in the future was also sitting right in front of us. And this was a little bit pre-pandemic, actually. So in January of 2020, at the Consumer Electronics Show, I announced our forthcoming enterprise data strategy, and we had our first public meeting to talk about what the core elements of our enterprise data strategy are going to look like, and that happened on June 30th, with a plan to really put forward a fuller strategy by the end of this calendar year. What do I think is going to be included? Well, the first element of the enterprise data strategy, I think, is going to focus on how do we make sure that we have the technical organization ready for enterprise data strategy, and that's going to be cloud forward, as we've already discussed. We'll also include, for example, a data lake strategy, appropriate security, and thinking a lot about sort of access and read, write, and inputs, etc. The second part of our data strategy is going to focus on the data itself. How do we aggregate data? How do we link data? How do we think about the appropriate governance of data, privacy? So what are the issues as it relates to the data itself? And how are we going to, as an agency, start to advance our capabilities, because we think about pulling data sets together to fill in data gaps, which ultimately in this data access component, a core question is data quality. In clinical data, which is the data sets that we typically work with, data quality is often a key question. There's a lot of dirty data in healthcare data. And so a key focus of this second part of our data strategy is going to be improving data quality. And then the third part of our data strategy is going to be about using data. And I think that the whole data strategy is going to be about putting data to use, because one of the best ways to improve data quality is to use data. And actually, one of the best ways to get the entire community understanding what's possible is to use data. And as I think about putting data to use, that's going to include analytics, it's going to include data storytelling and visualization, it's going to include making sure that we think about novel capabilities, including artificial intelligence and blockchain. So that's really where I see that part of our enterprise data strategy going.
You mentioned earlier about the hiring of a new chief data officer back in, I think, March timeframe. Is that person spending, 90 days on a listening tour? Are they collecting information? Are they meeting with the business units to try to say, okay, what really needs to be from a customer perspective, or from an agency customer perspective, what needs to be addressed from a data strategy perspective as well?
So I came from the tech industry, and specifically health tech. And in that part of my life, we always had a 90 to 120 day onboarding. And our terrific chief data officer walked into an organization where he was onboarding with Amy's health tech like onboarding plans in the middle of a pandemic where everybody's teleworking. So what does that look like? One is appropriately meeting people, although we have to be creative about how he meets people in a pandemic. And I've tried to make sure that he really understands priorities and how people think. So it's not about meeting leadership, so to speak, but it's actually about understanding customers. The second part of this onboarding is really around doing specific projects that teach the why. And I mentioned before our project around helping to know when an inspector can go to a particular manufacturing plant to do an inspection, and he led that project. And by leading that project, he started to understand all of the motivations and the people and who does what in actually pushing that project forward. So specific projects. And then the third part of his onboarding is actually the listening tour piece, where he spends a lot of time in different meetings and different capabilities. But actually, I think it's the third part, not the first part.
All right, excellent. We've talked a lot about data. We've talked a lot about cloud. We've talked IT modernization. Are there other priorities, other things on your plate? Not that it's not full enough, right?
So other things that are priorities to me, I think we've hit upon in different ways in today's conversation about the importance of workforce and culture. IT of the future, sort of technical organizations of the future, I personally believe will benefit from a shift from hierarchical and almost more military-esque in their sort of historical way of being organized to flatter, more collaborative, multiple cross-linking of different capabilities to come up with new product solutions and plans. So we've focused a lot on culture, where the first part of culture is building community and trust. The second part of culture is building communication inside of our organization and external with our customers. The third part of our culture is acknowledging that we need to continuously update our skills, not about having people with new skills replace us, but actually all of us having 10x skills that we bring to the table, but also continuing our learning in a learning environment. And then really that's helped us then sort of think about what we might look like in the future. Change in culture is hard, and so none of this is going to happen quickly. But one of the things that I have seen since I've come to the agency is a sort of a huge shift in how people are excited to talk about what's going on. Our technical org is called OIMT, and I call it #OIMT proud. And the more that we can focus on the visibility of our culture being critical to us, it's more than FEB scores. It's actually being able to do our business better. Another example of a metric that I am currently using, we were previously losing a lot of our technical staff to our business units who could pay more. And we've started to see that shift. And I'm continuing to watch that because we should be the place that people want to work because we make it the place that people want to work. And that's a really big focus for us. And as we brought in new senior leaders, it's senior leaders, but senior leaders who are servant leaders to push an organization forward.
That's a great sign when you saw this kind of people walking out the door to go to the business units, and now maybe people are coming into the door to work with you. It shows that obviously the reputation that you're building, the culture you're building is starting to, people get through the rest of the agency and people go, I want to work there because that seems like a good place to be. Is there certain types of skill sets you're looking for these days? I mean, everyone wants cyber, everyone wants certain ones, but are you guys focused on data in some way or AI?
Well, let me mention something about our cyber org, because I think our cyber org has actually been, our cyber security organization, I should say the whole thing out. But I think that they have really been a flagship or template for what good looks like within our technical org. And they have professional development. They have recurring meetings where they, focus on one of their employees, but it's not just, what their professional job is, but where they grew up and the kind of things that matter to them. So a lot of kind of getting to know your organization, and really is a place that attracts top talent. And we're working on that across all of the different types of capabilities. We need, network engineers and people who understand switches. We need all the different elements that kind of go along with building our technical org. But you sort of hit it on something else, which is that we need to now start adding to what we've historically had in the context of our technical org with new capabilities for our data org. And these two things sit next to each other. They're not completely distinct, but rather mutually reinforcing. And so we've now really needed to start to think about, who do we hire in our data organization? What does it look like to understand data governance, different types of data sets, data quality? What does it mean to have, for example, analysts who understand different analytic solutions, but also understand different mathematical solutions? And so we started to think about, do we need to bring in biostatisticians or epidemiologists or those other mathematical capabilities to act as a part of rounding out the set of solutions? And importantly, again, these need to be people who are talking together, not across each other. And so that's the other part that we've really sort of been focusing a lot on.
Amy, this has been a fascinating conversation. Unfortunately, we are out of time for today. So let me thank my guest. Dr. Amy Abernathy is the Principal Deputy Commissioner and Acting CIO at the Food and Drug Administration. Amy, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thank you.
I'm Jason Miller, and you've been listening to Ask the CIO, sponsored by Vion and Dell on Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search Ask the CIO.